Hello everyone, we are Rocio,
Montserrat.
I'm Felipe.
and today we are going to analyze and discuss the acclaimed book from Paul Auster's City of Glass.
Before we start discussing about our chapters, we think it's necessary to talk about our main protagonist, Daniel Quinn, a 35-year-old widow who sadly lost both his son and wife. He used to write poetry, but after the incident, he decided to start writing about detective novels.
One day, Quinn starts receiving a phone call from a man named Peter Seaman Jr., who is asking for a real detective named Paul Auster. After a few calls, Quinn decides to pretend to be the detective, and he got immersed in the case. Primarily, the book was presented as a mystery book, but it turned out to be a more complex story.
But before we get there, let's talk a little bit about the physical spaces that Daniel goes around during chapters 11 and 12. First, he's in his apartment, seemingly distracted about the fact that he has not been able to make the phone call to Virginia Stillman. Secondly, he goes around the streets of New York. But this part is very interesting because even though it's very descriptive and detailed about the directions of where he's going, actually the author is just trying to distract you from the fact that Daniel has no idea where he's going to.
And with that, let's talk about his mental state. In chapters 11 and 12, we can see that Quinn's mind starts to fall apart. He was curious and determined to solve this big mystery around New York City.
Mentally, he is lost, disoriented, confused, emotionally empty. Daniel Quinn's decisions have finally came in the form of serious consequences. The loss of his own family is a wound that has yet to be cured, but the loss of his own identity is something that started way before he started receiving the phone calls.
So, who is Daniel Quinn now? Is he a poet, a detective, a novelist, or nothing at all? He has lost himself completely, or is there still a glimpse of his true self waiting for him to notice? It's very valid to ask. Is he or is he not?
To be or not to be. He lost everything that made him him. To Queen, in our perspective, it was easier to pretend to be somebody else, to play a role, to create a new reality, rather than dealing with the fact that he lost everything.
Now it's time for a deeper analysis. During the book, one important detail is the complexity of the definition of the concepts identity and reality. What is an identity and what creates an identity and what deprives the character from creating an identity? What is real, what is not real, and when does reality become a lie and how does a lie become a reality?
And the paradoxes begin with author Paul Auster using his own name in the story as the detective Paul Auster. This is another example of how the author Paul Auster wants to emphasize on the internal conflict of what is real and what is not. He is part of the story, so is the story actually happening or is it just for the plot?
One of the things that made me think most about the book was how the author describes obsession. The idea that we need to be careful not to become too obsessed with our work, whims, and our fantasies.
This kind of obsession can lead us to develop personality disorders, just like it happened to Quinn. Due to the unresolved trauma of losing his own family, he starts losing himself completely, starting from the fact that he pretended to be somebody else. Then he starts living in the streets, losing absolute sense of logical perspective.
Taxi Driver for Martin Scorsese and City of Glass actually share a really interesting similarity. Both Travis Bike and Quinn slowly isolate himself from society. Travis pulls away everyone around him just to complete and fulfill his mission that only matters, just like Quinn.
My favorite part of the book is when Quinn is alone in his empty apartment and he keeps writing in his red notebook even when the pencil has no ink left. He moves his hands on the paper as he's still trying to speak, but there is no words anymore. That moment, in my opinion, hits very hard because it's not about the detective story anymore. is about losing yourself while trying to find meaning.
One of my favorite parts it was when he saw himself in a mirror after a long time of period, and he at first he doesn't recognize the man in the mirror because he has changed a lot, both in appearance and mentality.
My favorite part is actually when he starts describing how is living in the streets. I think that part is very important because here is when you see that there's finally a break in his own identity, a final break on his own persona.
As a conclusion, chapters 11 and 12 shows the final and most important of Daniel Quinn's collapse, physically, mentally, and emotionally. What starts as a detective story, it turns out to be a deep reflection about identity and what's real and what is not real. Through Quinn's obsessions with the Simon case, the book shows how a person can lose themselves when they hold too tightly to a role or a fantasy.